My son texted me, "Don't come to my wedding. My wife doesn't want to see you. My name is Michael." And the most painful message I have ever received wasn't from a stranger. It came from my own son just 3 days before his wedding. And those few words changed everything I believed about my family. I read the message over and over again, hoping I had misunderstood it. The words remained exactly the same. "Dad, please don't come to the wedding. Emily doesn't want to see you there, and I don't want any problems on our special day." My hands trembled as I stared at my phone. I had imagined many conversations with my son over the years, but never one like this. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by old family photographs that told a completely different story. There was a picture of him on his first day of school, another from the afternoon he caught his first baseball, and one of us laughing together during a family vacation by the lake. Looking at those memories, I struggled to understand how we had reached this point. After my wife passed away several years earlier, our relationship had slowly changed. My son moved to another city for work, and our conversations became shorter and less frequent. Whenever we spoke, I tried to be supportive, but life seemed to keep pulling us in different directions. When he introduced me to Emily, I welcomed her warmly and hoped she would become part of our family. Although we were always polite to one another, I sensed there was a distance I couldn't explain. I never argued with her, never criticized her choices, and always respected their decisions. Yet something always felt unresolved. In the months leading up to the wedding, my son became increasingly busy, often apologizing for missed phone calls and postponed visits. I assumed it was simply the stress of planning such an important day. That was why the message hurt so deeply. It wasn't just an invitation being withdrawn. It felt as though I was being erased from one of the most meaningful moments of my son's life. I wanted to respond immediately, but every sentence I typed sounded emotional or defensive, so I deleted each one. Instead, I placed my phone on the table, took a deep breath, and wondered whether there was a truth behind those painful words that I had yet to discover. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the little boy who used to run toward me after school, excited to tell me about his day. It was difficult to accept that the same son now wanted me to stay away from one of the biggest moments of his life. The next morning, I decided not to let my emotions guide me. Instead of replying with anger or disappointment, I sent him a simple message telling him that I loved him, respected his decision, and hoped his wedding would be filled with happiness. I stared at the screen for several minutes after pressing send, but no reply came. As the hours passed, I found myself wondering whether those words had truly come from my son or whether there was more to the story than I understood. My sister, who had always been close to our family, called later that afternoon after hearing about the wedding preparations from another relative. She naturally assumed I was excited about attending, and I struggled to explain why I had suddenly become quiet. After a long pause, I finally told her about the message. She was stunned and insisted that something didn't feel right. She reminded me that my son had always spoken about wanting me beside him on his wedding day, even years before he met Emily. Her reaction made me question everything once again. That evening, I searched through old conversations with my son, reading months of messages that had always ended with kindness and respect. Nothing suggested that he wanted to remove me from his life. The contrast between those conversations and the recent text was impossible to ignore. 2 days before the wedding, another unexpected message arrived. It wasn't from my son, but from an unfamiliar number. The sender simply wrote, "Before you make any decision, there is something you deserve to know." There was no name, no explanation, and no further message. I looked at the screen in complete silence, realizing that the painful text I had received might not be the whole story after all. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt that the truth was waiting just beyond my reach. I stared at that unknown message for a long time, wondering who could possibly know about the situation and why they believed I needed to hear something before the wedding. My first instinct was to ignore it. I had spent my entire life trying to respect my son's choices, and I didn't want to create more tension during a time that was supposed to be about his happiness. But something inside me told me that there was a reason. This message had arrived at that exact moment. After several minutes of hesitation, I replied with a simple question: "Who are you, and what do you need to tell me?" The response came quickly: The person introduced themselves as Daniel, an old friend of my son's from college. He explained that he had debated whether to contact me because he didn't want to interfere in my son's personal life. But after hearing what happened, he felt that I deserved to know. There was more behind the decision to keep me away from the wedding. My heart started beating faster as I read his words. Daniel explained that over the past few months, he had noticed changes in my son's behavior. He said my son often seemed stressed and conflicted whenever the topic of family came up. According to him, my son had mentioned several times that he wanted me at the wedding, but felt caught between different expectations and pressures. I didn't want to believe that my son was being forced into a decision he didn't truly want, but I also didn't want to assume anything without understanding the full situation. I asked Daniel if he knew why Emily didn't want me there. His answer was careful. He said he didn't know every detail, but he believed there had been misunderstandings and conversations that had never reached me. After ending the conversation, I sat quietly for a long time. For years, I had believed that distance between family members happened because people stopped caring. Now I began to wonder if sometimes distance was created because people stopped communicating. The wedding was only one day away, and I knew I had to decide whether to stay silent or search for the truth. Before my son's most important day arrived, the night before the wedding, I sat in my quiet home thinking about every moment that had led us here. I looked through old family albums, not because I wanted to make myself sad, but because I needed to remember the bond my son and I had built over decades. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle, helping him prepare for his first job interview, and standing beside him during every important moment of his life. Those memories reminded me that one painful message could not erase an entire lifetime of love. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not arrive at the wedding uninvited, and I would not create a scene that could embarrass my son. But I also couldn't ignore the feeling that there was a misunderstanding that needed to be resolved. I decided to meet my son privately before the ceremony if he was willing to talk. After several attempts, he finally answered my call. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I gently asked him whether he truly wanted me to stay away, or whether someone else had influenced that decision. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. His voice sounded different from the confident person I knew. He admitted that things had become complicated, and that he felt trapped between keeping peace with his future wife and being honest about his own feelings. I listened carefully and asked him why he hadn't spoken to me directly instead of sending such a painful message. He quietly admitted that he was afraid of disappointing everyone and thought avoiding conflict would be easier. Hearing those words hurt, but they also gave me a small sense of hope. At least now we were finally having a real conversation. I told him that I didn't want it to be a source of stress on his wedding day. My only wish was for him to be happy and certain about the life he was choosing. Before we ended the call, he promised that we would talk again after he had time to think. As I placed the phone down, I realized that sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is giving them space, while still leaving the door open for understanding and forgiveness. After that conversation with my son, I spent the rest of the day reflecting on everything he had said. For the first time in weeks, I felt that there was a possibility of healing instead of losing him completely. I knew he was facing his own struggles, and I didn't want to make his wedding day more difficult by forcing him to choose between the people he loved. Still, I hoped he would find the courage to be honest about what he truly wanted. The following morning, I received another message from him. This time, it was not cold or distant. He simply asked if we could meet for a short conversation before the ceremony. I agreed immediately. When I arrived at the small cafe where we decided to meet, I saw my son sitting alone by the window. He looked nervous, almost like the little boy who used to come to me whenever he had made a mistake and didn't know how to explain it. We sat quietly for a few moments before he finally spoke. He apologized for the message he had sent and admitted that he had handled the situation poorly. He explained that several disagreements and misunderstandings had grown between me and Emily over time. But instead of helping everyone communicate, he had chosen the easiest path and avoided the conversation altogether. I listened without interrupting because I wanted him to say everything he had been holding inside. He told me that he never wanted to hurt me and that he still wanted me to be part of his life. He had simply become overwhelmed by trying to keep everyone happy. I told him that mistakes could be forgiven, but honest conversations were necessary if our family was going to move forward. I also told him that my place in his life should never depend on whether someone else approved of me. After our conversation, he looked relieved, but he still seemed uncertain about what would happen next. I reminded him that the wedding was about love and commitment, not about old disagreements. As we walked away from the cafe, I didn't know exactly how the day would end, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that my son and I were finally standing on the same side. Again, as I drove away from the cafe, I felt a mixture of emotions that were difficult to describe. I was relieved that my son and I had finally spoken honestly, but I also knew that one conversation could not erase months of confusion and distance. The wedding was only hours away, and I wanted to respect the importance of the day, while allowing my son to make his own choices. I returned home, prepared myself quietly, and decided that I would not let sadness control my actions. Whether the first attended the ceremony or not, I wanted my son to remember that his father supported his happiness. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was my son. His voice sounded calmer than before, and he told me that he had spent the last few hours thinking about our conversation. He admitted that he had allowed fear of conflict to influence his decisions and that he regretted making me feel unwanted. He said he wanted me there, not because he felt pressured, but because I was his father and an important part of his life. Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. I told him that I never wanted him to feel caught between people he loved. I only wanted honesty and respect. A few hours later, I arrived at the wedding venue. The decorations were beautiful, the guests were smiling, and everything looked exactly as my son had dreamed it would. When he saw me enter, he walked toward me with a nervous but genuine smile. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he hugged me, and that simple moment carried more meaning than any apology could express. Some guests noticed the emotional reunion, but I didn't care about their opinions anymore. This was not about proving who was right or wrong. It was about a father and son finding their way back to each other. As the ceremony began, I sat quietly watching my son start a new chapter of his life. I still knew there were conversations ahead, and not every problem would disappear immediately. But I also knew something important had changed. The wall between us had finally started to come down, and the love that had always existed beneath the misunderstandings was beginning to shine through again. After the wedding ceremony ended, I watched my son and his wife greet their guests with happiness and excitement. From a distance, everything looked perfect, but I knew that behind every family celebration there are stories, emotions, and struggles that others never see. I didn't expect all the misunderstandings between Emily and me to disappear in one day, and I wasn't looking for a sudden change of heart. I simply hoped that we could begin building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. During the reception, my son found a quiet moment to sit with me. He thanked me for coming and admitted that he had been afraid the situation would become a painful memory connected to his wedding day. I told him that what mattered most was not the mistake itself, but the willingness to recognize it and make things better. He then explained that he and Emily had been dealing with pressure from different sides while planning their future together. He admitted that instead of helping everyone communicate, he had allowed the situation to become more complicated by staying silent. I appreciated his honesty because I knew admitting a mistake required courage. Later in the evening, Emily approached me. For the first time, we had a conversation without tension or hesitation. She explained that she had carried concerns based on misunderstandings and that she regretted allowing those feelings to create distance between us. I listened carefully and told her that I never wanted to be someone who brought stress into their marriage. I only wanted to be treated as part of their family. We both agreed that trust would take time, but we were willing to take the first steps. As I looked around the room at my son celebrating the beginning of his new life, I felt grateful. The day that had started with a painful message had transformed into a reminder that relationships can survive difficult moments when people choose communication over pride. I realized that family is not defined by never having disagreements. It is defined by the willingness to understand, forgive, and continue choosing one another even after the hardest conversations. In the weeks after the wedding, I noticed small but meaningful changes that showed our relationship was slowly healing. My son started calling more often, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to share parts of his new life with me. We talked about ordinary things, the challenges of adjusting to married life, his work, and the simple moments that made him happy. Those conversations reminded me of the connection we had before misunderstandings created distance between us. Emily also began making an effort to know me better. We started with small conversations during family gatherings, sharing stories about our lives and discovering that we had more in common than either of us had realized. I understood that rebuilding trust required patience because years of assumptions could not disappear overnight. One evening, my son invited me to their home for dinner. As we sat together at the table, I looked around and realized how different this moment felt compared to the weeks before the wedding. There was no tension, no uncomfortable silence, and no feeling that I had to carefully choose every word. We were simply a family spending time together. During dinner, my son apologized again for the way he handled everything before the wedding. He said he had learned that avoiding difficult conversations often creates bigger problems than facing them with honesty. I told him that I appreciated his apology, but what mattered most was the change I could see in his actions. Anyone can say the right words, but true growth is shown through consistent behavior. That night, as I drove home, I thought about how close we had come to losing a relationship that meant everything to me. The painful message that once felt like a final rejection had become the beginning of a deeper understanding. I learned that sometimes people hurt us not because they stop loving us, but because they become overwhelmed, afraid, or unable to communicate their feelings properly. What matters is whether they are willing to recognize their mistakes and make an effort to repair what was damaged. Months passed, and the painful memory of that message slowly became a reminder of how important communication truly is. When I look back at that moment, I no longer saw only the hurt I felt. I also saw the lessons that came from it. My son and I had both learned that love alone is not always enough to maintain a strong relationship. It requires honesty, patience, and the courage to have difficult conversations before misunderstandings become too large to repair. Our family began creating new memories together. We celebrated small occasions, shared meals, and spent time together without the tension that had once surrounded every conversation. Emily and I also developed a better understanding of each other. We discovered that many of our disagreements had come from assumptions rather than reality. She admitted that she had judged certain situations without knowing the full story, and I admitted that I sometimes kept my feelings hidden instead of explaining them openly. Those honest conversations helped us move forward. One afternoon, my son visited me and brought an old family photo album. We spent hours looking through pictures from his childhood, laughing at memories we had almost forgotten. He pointed to pictures of moments when I had supported him and told me that he finally understood how much those sacrifices had meant. Hearing those words from him was something I had quietly hoped for but never expected. As we sat together, I realized that the greatest gift was not receiving an apology or being included in the wedding. The greatest gift was rebuilding the connection we had almost lost. Life will always bring difficult moments, and families will sometimes hurt each other without intending to. But I learned that a painful chapter does not have to become the end of the story. Sometimes it can become the turning point that brings people closer than before. Looking back at the message that once broke my heart, I now see it as the beginning of a journey that taught us all the importance of forgiveness, understanding, and choosing love even when things feel impossible. As the years went by, I often thought about how close our family had come to being, permanently divided by a misunderstanding. What once felt like the most painful moment of my life had become one of the most important lessons I had ever learned. My son and I were no longer the father and son who avoided difficult conversations. We had become two people who understood that honesty was the foundation of any strong relationship. Whenever a problem appeared, we talked about it instead of allowing silence to create distance. That change made our bond stronger than it had been before. One evening, during a family gathering, my son shared the story of how he almost made the biggest mistake of his life by letting fear and pressure influence his decisions. He didn't share it to embarrass himself. but to remind everyone around us that even good people can make poor choices when they are overwhelmed. He said that the most important thing he learned was that protecting a relationship requires courage, not avoidance. Listening to him speak, I felt a sense of peace because I knew he had truly grown from the experience. Emily also became an important part of our family's healing. Over time, we moved beyond the misunderstandings that had once separated us and built a relationship based on respect. We didn't pretend that the past never happened because those experiences had taught us valuable lessons. Instead, we accepted what happened, learned from it, and chose to move forward. I realized that forgiveness does not mean forgetting the pain. It means refusing to let that pain control the future. The message my son sent before his wedding had once made me feel unwanted, but the journey that followed showed me something far more meaningful. It showed me that love can survive difficult moments when people are willing to listen, apologize, and change. As I watched my family grow closer with each passing year, I felt grateful that we had found our way back to each other. The wedding that almost became a symbol of separation became the beginning of a new chapter filled with understanding, respect, and a bond stronger than before. Today, when I think about that painful message from my son, I no longer remember only the sadness it caused. I remember the journey that followed and the lessons it brought into our lives. There was a time when I believed that one decision, one misunderstanding, or one hurtful moment could permanently change a family forever. But I learned that relationships are not defined by the hardest moments they face. They are defined by how people respond afterward. My son, Emily, and I discovered that honest conversations can repair what silence damages, and forgiveness can create a stronger bond than before. The wedding day that began with uncertainty became a reminder that love is often tested not during easy times, but during moments of confusion and challenge. I also learned that being a parent does not mean expecting perfection from your children. It means understanding that they are human, that they will make mistakes, and that they sometimes need guidance even when they believe they have all the answers. At the same time, children must remember that parents have feelings too, and sometimes a simple conversation can prevent years of unnecessary pain. Looking back, I am grateful that we found the courage to talk before it was too late. The greatest victory was never being invited to the wedding or proving that I was right. The greatest victory was finding my way back to my son's heart and rebuilding a relationship based on trust. Today, our family gatherings are filled with laughter, stories, and memories that remind us how far we have come. Whenever I see my son and his wife together, I feel proud knowing that our family overcame a difficult chapter and came out stronger. That message once felt like the end of my relationship with my son, but it became the beginning of a deeper understanding. Life will always bring challenges, but with patience, love, and open communication, even the most painful moments can become opportunities for healing. And that is the lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life. At last I requested you for subscribe over channel and share it with others. Your one subscribe make us happy, and courageful. Maybe live happy, maybe live long.